My sources are saying the Maggia is mounting a comeback. The old crime families were all but wiped out, until Fisk went away and they started filling the void.
I really enjoyed Marvel Spider-Man. It had an amazing story, satisfying combat, and made you feel like you were in the web shooters of Spider-Man throughout the game. The game was a lot of fun, and I rated it very highly. To add to the experience, Spider-Man also received some DLC called The City That Never Sleeps. After enjoying the base game so much, I was a little uncertain going into the DLC content. Was I going to enjoy the fact that I'm getting more Spider-Man content, or was the content not going to quite live up to the experience of the base game? Did such a story-heavy game need more content? And where would they go with it if they did? Well, let's take a look and see if we can't find the answers to some of these questions. The City That Never Sleeps is available in a number of different ways. If you already have the PlayStation 4 version of the game and are looking at getting the DLC, you can buy it in two different ways. You can buy each of the 3 chapters separately for $9.99, or you can buy them as a bundle for $24.99. If you don't have Spider-Man yet, then any digital version of the game you buy now will already have the DLC bundled with it. The PlayStation 4 version is the Game of the Year edition for $39.99, or the PS5 remaster version for $49.99 or $59.99 because it's also been released on the PC. So what does the game add to the experience? As I already said, The City That Never Sleeps adds 3 additional chapters to the game that are all connected to form its own narrative. While it does involve some loose ends from the main game, it is largely its own thing. The main arc of the narrative involves Hammerhead, a classic Spider-Man villain. Basically, Hammerhead is trying to take control of the Maggia crime family so that he can fill the void of power left from Kingpin, Mr. Negative, and the events of the main game. The story is pretty good. It is a bit lacking compared to the narrative in the base game, but is good in its own way. Unlike the base game that does a great job of mixing Spider-Man and Peter Parker, the DLC is very much a Spider-Man focused affair. This takes a bit of the emotional grounding out of the story, even though there are some attempts within the narrative to kind of create some emotional impacts. On the plus side, Hammerhead turns out to be quite a challenge, but he's also a fairly straightforward villain, going for power and wanting to be in control of New York, rather than some of the more tragic stories from the base game. Each chapter also adds a variety of events, from crimes to screwball challenges, collectibles, base battles, and side missions. You also have 3 different suits in each of the chapters that unlock throughout the content. The events in the game are largely similar to their equivalents in the base game, but are often tied to their own little side stories within the DLC to make them a bit more interesting. That's about all that the DLC contains. Each chapter probably takes about 3 to 4 hours if you're going for 100% completion, so it's around a 9 to 12 hour total if you're going for everything in all of the chapters. It'll probably be considerably shorter if you just speed through it. Now, I've gone over what the DLC contains, so the question is it worth it? You'd think with as much as I love the original game, that this would be an easy answer for me. For those buying the Game of the Year version or the remastered version, you already have the DLC, and so they are definitely worth playing. They don't cost you anything extra, so I would say yes, go ahead and play it. For those who have the older version on the PS4, my opinion is a bit more mixed. The story is good, but does lack some of the emotional beats that made the main game story so enjoyable for me. As I said, it does have some emotional moments in it, but none of them really got to nearly the level of the ones in the main story. As I said, Hammerhead also winds up being a rather formidable villain. He kind of is hanging over all 3 of the chapters, but he's also a very much more straightforward villain as well. And that's not necessarily a criticism, but it's just a bit different from some of the villains in the main game. It just makes it a different experience. Where the DLC really falters, in my opinion, is in the activities. They have a lot of these activities and events and things like that, and I couldn't help but feel that they were just a bit of a padding, something to make the DLCs feel a little bit longer. Maybe this is only my experience because I did all the activities in the base game. I wound up 100%ing it before moving on to the DLC, and so these extra events, I didn't really need many more tokens to level stuff up. The only ones that I did were for challenges, and it was super nice to have the screwball challenges because they gave me the last few challenge tokens I needed, but I was able to be done with those after the first chapter of the DLC as well, so it just left me nothing to really gain from doing these events, and so they just seemed like filler. Not that any of them were bad. To be honest, the worst were probably the crimes, again, because you just have to swing around for a while until you find one, and then I didn't even need the crime tokens it gave me. Now, this might just be something that I have an issue with because I go for 100% and try to do everything that is in a game. But when the DLC also locks 3 of the suits behind completing everything, I feel like it's affecting more than just me, or you're not getting all the stuff that the DLC has if you don't go for that 100%. So do I think that the City That Never Sleeps DLC is worth it? I would give a hesitant yes. To be honest, the $24 price tag for what you're getting seems a bit steep. As of this video, both the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man Game of the Year Edition and the PS5 Remaster are on sale. The Game of the Year is $5 cheaper than the DLC, coming in at around $20. And the Remaster is only $5 more at $30. So in a case like that, going after one of those makes a lot more sense than buying the DLC at full price. Now, the DLC does also go on sale, and so that would be a good third option, like you either need to buy a different version basically, or wait until the DLC hits sales, which I've seen it on sale before. The DLC was just a bit of a mixed bag for me. I like the story, and it has some character development that will be interesting to see how it's developed in future games. The extra activities seemed a bit unnecessary, especially when they weren't tied to the story, or at least having its own side story. I mean, thankfully, most of those did. It was just ones like the crimes that really felt lacking a bigger impact on what you were doing. I also felt that having this be all one unified whole would have probably made the inclusion of these events a bit more tolerable, instead of having a whole new set of similar activities for every chapter. It just felt really redundant by the time you're all done with it. As it stands, The City That Never Sleeps is a DLC that just isn't as good as I would have liked. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just isn't as good as the game it's connected to. It gives you a little extra taste of the world of Spider-Man, but is maybe a bit pricey for what it does give you. It's totally worth playing if you have a version of the game that comes with it, but wait for a sale of some sort either for the DLC or an updated version of Spider-Man if you don't have it already.
We need to take them all out, like we used to. Quiet as a cat.
Sneaky as a spider.